This is homework set 4, arithmetic with real numbers, multiplication and division, and we'll start with questions 1 through 7. Question 1 asks us to use the order of operations to simplify this expression as much as possible. So to start, let's just remind ourselves the hierarchy of things here. As we look left to right through a numerical expression, we're going to do powers and roots. Now, we're not really dealing with roots just yet, but powers we are. Then we go back and we do multiplications and divisions. And then we go back and we do addition, subtractions, just in the order that we see them. So look through this one here. What have we got? Well, I see a power and another power. So let's take care of these powers. So here's what we'll do. I'll just rewrite this whole thing. 2 times, now negative 2 cubed. Here's what it's going to be. Here's what I'm saying. Negative 2 times negative 2 times negative 2. So this power says that that base appears as a multiplication 3 times. So what I've got here is negative 2 times negative 2 is 4, times negative 2 again is negative 8. So let's put a negative 8 in here, and then minus 5. Now this is negative 3 cubed. Negative 3 cubed. That is negative 3, negative 3, negative 3, which will give us, well, that was interesting, but this will give us negative 3 times negative 3 is positive 9, times negative 3 again. Positive 9 times negative 3 is negative 27. So let's put a negative 27 in here. So now we're working with this expression. And I see what I've got here is a multiplication, a subtraction, and a multiplication. Let's take care of these multiplications first. So what do we get first up? 2 times negative 8. Positive times negative is negative, so I'll get negative 16, right? 2 times 8 is 16. And then I get minus. Now, that minus right here up at the top, that minus right there, that's right here. And then I get 5 times that negative 27. So 5 times negative 27. Positive 5 times negative 27. If you're not sure, got a calculator. So positive 5 times negative 27 is negative 135, just to check. 135. Right? Positive 5. Here, positive 5 times negative 27. Positive times negative is negative 135. Now I'm looking at negative 16. Now I can read this like this. This is the opposite of a negative number, right? It's really subtraction. So subtraction, how do you do a subtraction? It's addition, change it to addition, of the opposite. Now the opposite of negative 135 is positive 135. Now the way we usually just read this is if you have this, and it's not really correct, but we do it anyway. Negative, negative, positive, right? This is the opposite of a negative. It really isn't the opposite, but I'm going to read it that way because it makes it easier. Opposite of a negative number is a positive number, so that's how I read it. Now, I'm adding 2 numbers with opposite signs. So what I do is a subtraction. Larger absolute value minus smaller absolute value. So it's going to be 135. So what I'm thinking now is this. Okay, what is 135 minus 16? Well, that is 119. And I'm going to use the sign of the larger absolute value. Now, this one here is positive. That's the larger absolute value. So I'm going to put a plus sign with this one. So it's going to be 119. So I don't need to write the plus. I'm just going to write 119. Question 2, we're just going to multiply these 2 numbers. Now there's no number out in front here. So this is a negative sign, not a minus sign. Minus means you have something minus something. This is a negative. So I've got negative 9 times negative 5. And I know that a negative times a negative gives me a positive. So this is going to be positive. 9 times 5 is 45. Question 3, let's make this multiplication here. And I'm saying multiplication because I've got negative 6 times negative 3 times negative 5 times negative 2. So it's all a multiplication. So I'm just going to go left to right. But the first thing I'm going to do is determine the sign. Now look what we have. A negative and a negative. That's going to give us a positive. Times a negative is a negative. Negative times a negative is positive. So here's what I do. Count the number of negative signs. If it's even, if you have a negative sign, an even number of times is positive. If you have a negative sign an odd number of times, it's going to be negative, right? If I have negative, negative, gives me a positive. Positive times negative is negative. Negative times positive is negative. So an even number of negative signs gives you a positive. An odd number gives you a negative. So I know right away I've got a positive number. Now let's just multiply. 6 times 3, 18. 18 times 5, 90. 90 times 2, 180. So let's write this as 180. Question 4 asks us to compute negative 3 squared. Now, in my head, I know that this is, here's what I'm thinking this is. This is negative 3 twice. Now, negative times negative, right? Negative times negative is a positive. So I know that this is going to be 3 times 3. I know it's going to be positive 9. So this is going to be a 9. Now, another way I can think of it is this. How many negative signs do I have? 2 of them, right? And here they are, right here and right here. I've got 2 negatives. That's an even number of negatives. So I know it's going to be positive. And then 3 times 3 is 9. Question 5, up here at the top right here. Negative 2 cubed. So what I'm seeing in my head is 3 of those negative 2. So I'm saying this. Just visualize this. Negative 2 times negative 2 times negative 2. Now, I have an odd number of negative signs, right? 1, 2, 3. An odd number of negative signs. So I know this result is going to be negative. And then 2 times 2 is 4. Times 2 again is 8, right? 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 is 8. So we are going to get a negative 8 here. Now careful. Easy mistake is negative 2 times 3, getting negative 6. But the negative 2 is not multiplying the 3. Saying negative 2 appears in a multiplication 3 times. Question 6. Let's compute negative 2 to the 4th. Now, you don't have to write this all out if you can do it in your head, but I'm visualizing negative 2, negative 2. You're going to get 4 of these. Now, I've got an even number of negative signs, right? I've got 4 negative signs, so I know the result's going to be positive. And then 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 again is 8, times 2 again is 16. So let's make this 16. Question 7 gives us a multiplication. Now I've got some grouping symbols, grouping these 2 numbers and these 2 numbers here. So let's compute each one individually. So negative 4 minus 5. Now if you think about this, it's going to be, which of course you should, negative 4 plus negative 5. You're adding 2 numbers with the same sign. So add their absolute values. 4 plus 5 is 9, and use the common sign. So this is going to be a negative 9. Or you can just think about it this way. You're down 4, you lose 5 more, you're down 9. Now what have we got over here? Negative 5 minus 7. So you're down 5, you lose 7, now you're down 12. Now we're going to multiply. So what about our sign? Negative times negative. I've got 2 negatives. It's going to be positive. 9 times 12. 108, and it's going to be positive. So let's just write our 108. And there we have it. Number 9, let's run through this. I see I've got a multiplication, subtraction, multiplication, addition, multiplication. Let's do these multiplications first. So I'll take care of this one. 6 times 10, that's a 60. Now, here's how I'm going to work this. It's not really true, but it works. I'm going to think of this as, it's really minus, right? Minus what? Minus 5 times negative 6. But I'm going to think of it this way. Just forget that for a minute. I'm going to think of this minus sign as really a negative. So I'm going to think of it as negative 5 times negative 6. And that works because what I'm really doing here, let's just back up a minute here. What I've got is this. I've got minus 5, right? It's really like 60, minus 5 times negative 6. What do? You change subtraction to addition of the opposite. So really, what happens? This negative, I can associate that minus sign as a negative sign with the 5. So that minus sign, I'm going to associate it with a negative with the 5. And it works because minus is addition of the opposite. So what am I going to get here when I do this? What I'm going to get is negative 5 times negative 6 is positive 30. And then what about over here? Positive 9 times negative 11 is, positive times negative is negative 99. Now just moving left to right, I'm going to have a 90 minus 99. So how about 90 minus 99 is negative 9. Question number 9, we've got a multiplication, an addition, a multiplication, and 2 powers. Let's take care of the powers first. So I'm going to rewrite the whole expression. 3 times, now, negative 9 squared. Negative 9 squared. Negative 9 times negative 9 is positive 81. And then plus 3 times, all right, negative 6 squared. Negative 6 squared, negative 6 times negative 6 is positive 36. Now I've got a multiplication, an addition, and a multiplication. Let's do these multiplications first. So we'll do that one, then we'll add, then we'll do this one here. 3 times 81, 243, plus, now 3 times 36, 108. If you need a calculator, that's okay. Now I'm going to add 2 numbers. Now if you need a calculator for this one, that's fine. Or if you just do it, probably faster if you just wrote it down. 1, 5, right, 11, 5, 3. So how about 351? Question 10, this is pretty much like number 9, just some different numbers. Let's take care of these powers first. I'll do this one, then I'll do this one. So rewriting the whole expression, I'll have 2 times, now, negative 2 cubed. That's negative 2 times negative 2 times negative 2, right? Negative 2 cubed is negative 2 times negative 2 times negative 2, which is 3 negatives gives me a negative. 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 is 8. So I'm going to get a negative 8 here. And then minus 10 times, now, negative 3 cubed. Well, negative 3 times negative 3 times negative 3. That is negative 27. Now, I have a multiplication, a subtraction, and a multiplication. Let's take care of this multiplication. So positive 2 times negative 8 is negative 16. And the way I'm going to look at this is negative 10 times negative 27 is positive 270. Now, I'm adding 2 numbers with opposite signs, so I'm just going to subtract. What is 270 minus 16? So if you do it on your calculator, that's just fine. It's 254. And what sign? Positive or negative? Well, look at the absolute values. This absolute value is 16. This absolute value is bigger, 270. So use the sign of the larger absolute value. This 270 is positive, so I'm going to claim that that's a positive 254. There we go. And that brings us to the end of questions 1 through 10 and homework set 4.